Hello, and welcome to this, our 93rd live stream, praying for the people of Turkey, as well as Syria. Okay? In case you are not aware, there was a terrible earthquake in Anatolia, Turkey, and Syria. That's killed thousands of people, and we would urge everyone on the channel right now to pray for the people there, that they may get aid. It's a war-torn region, and right now it's very, very difficult to get aid and assistance to the people who really, really need it right now. So we want to remind everyone today that please pray for them. You know, donate to your local charities that will lend assistance. You know, extend the hand of friendship out to them, because right now they really, really need it. So we just ask that everyone pray and provide support to the humanitarian assistance out there. Okay, we also want to let everyone know that we've got a new setup here as well. As you know, last week we had problems with our Twidget software, and we were not able to resolve it. So we've got a new piece of software that's generally doing the same sort of function, but it's going to look a little different, and hopefully there isn't going to be much in the way of technical glitches. But it's not well tested. We were still trying to get this work like a half hour before we started here. So, with that said, it's the same format as always, where we take your questions on ancient Egypt and the Bible. Super chats have priority. If you're going to ask a non-super chat, which we do take non-super chat questions, please ask your question only once, so the live chat doesn't get congested. We also ask that if you ask a question about, say, a verse in the Bible or a foreign language, that you give me some context. In the case of a verse on the Bible, give me what book it's from, what chapter, and what verse. If it's a foreign language, please tell me what language you think it is and what you think the word means. So with that said, let's get into the questions. Okay. And we're going to start tonight with 4 non-super chats. And our first question tonight here is from Darkblade. And he asks, how does one identify Abraham and the Israelites as Amorite people without blatantly contradicting the statement of the Amorites being descended of Canaan, son of Ham, in Genesis 10:15-20? And Abraham being identified as a patriarchal descendant of Shem in the genealogy of 11:10-26. Okay. Now, let's go first of all to Genesis 10. I'm going to pull up our Bible here. 10:15. What was that verse again? 10:15-20. So 10 verses 15, and it reads, and Canaan became father of Sidon, and his firstborn and Heth, and the Jebusite, and the Amorite, and the Girgashite, and the Hivite, and the Archite, and the Sinite, and the Ardavite, and the Zemarite, and the Hamathite. And afterward the families of the Canaanite were spread abroad. And the territory of the Canaanite extended from Sidon as you go to Gerar, as far as Gaza, as you go towards Sodom and Gomorrah and Admah and Zeboim, as far as Lasha. These are the sons of Ham, according to their families, according to their nations, by their lands and their nations. Okay. Now, one of the first things we need to understand about, say, Genesis 10 is it's really not giving you a sort of a complete picture of, an absolute picture of pedigree here. These are tribes and peoples that intermarried. So when it says here that the Amorite was, Canaan was the father of Sidon and Heth and Jebusite and Amorite, This is a process of centuries, if not millennia. Okay? So, when you're talking about genealogies that far removed, from each other, this is really, it's not a precision thing. People groups are going to intermarry. Okay? People groups are going to intermarry. Some of the peoples of Shem are going to intermarry with some of the peoples of Canaan, and vice versa. You're going to get this mix of different people groups. So what you got here in chapter 10 of Genesis is not so much a view of, say, how do I say it, unmixed peoples. Like, the peoples of Canaan did not just stick to the peoples of Canaan. And the people of the Amorites just didn't stick to the Amorites. They intermarried with each other. This was normal. It's still normal. Probably more normal today than it ever has been. But, so when we look at a verse like a passage like this, it's giving you an ideological view of the Table of Nations, not necessarily a genetic view of the Table of Nations. Because all these groups are intermarrying. All of them. So, this is, I think, very, very important to understand as we look into a passage like this. It's not meant to be read as, say, a genealogical, an absolute guide to who was descended from whom. It's giving you an ideological view. So you have to keep that in mind when you look at Genesis 10. Now, when we look at the second passage here, which is 11 here. Let's go to 11. Okay. And verse 10. Now, this is going to give you a different kind of ideological view, but it's along the same lines. In verse 10, these are, and get the Bible back up. These are the records of the generations of Shem. Where was that? Okay, I'm not going to read that entire passage, but, generations of Shem. Shem was 100 years old and became father of Arpachshad 2 years after the flood, and so on, all the way down to verse 26. And Nahor lived, verse 24, 29 years and became father of Terah, and Nahor lived 119 years after he became father of Terah, and he and other sons and daughters, and Terah lived 70 years, and he became father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Now, there are a couple differences in the structure, too, between the Table of Nations in Genesis 10 and what we find in Genesis 11. There's some very, very interesting differences here. I think the first thing is, in the case of, say, Genesis 10, we're getting a sort of a division of man along the line of nations. Not tribes, not clans, not people groups. Nations. Okay? These are big, kind of amorphous entities. Okay? So, you're really in some ways comparing apples and oranges here with Genesis 10 versus Genesis 11. Genesis 11 is basically a descent of clans. So there's a difference right there. You look at, say, the organization of, say, Genesis 10, it's basically saying, okay, from this one nation came these other nations. Whereas in Genesis 11, you get one clan that's begetting other clans. It's a lot more focused, and thus we can also expect more precision from Genesis 11 than, say, from Genesis 10. So I think that's the principal differences here between, say, Genesis 10 and Genesis 11. This one's focused on nations, these big sort of blobby people groups that are really sort of only defined by, say, ethnic and cultural practices, Whereas, say, in Genesis 11, you've got a sort of a precise view. Now, within that sort of where, say, the blobbiness of, say, nation groups intersects with clan groups, you can have, say, both intermarriage with, say, Canaanite groups, and at the same time have a direct descent from the line of Shem. So the Amorites, maybe as a whole, maybe descend, at least culturally, to some respect, maybe genetically, from Canaanites. But say the line of Abraham persists through the Amorite nation, through a line of Shem. So we have to be a little careful here, not to draw a contradiction here where perhaps none exists. In fact, most certainly none exists, just because, as I said, the amorphous nature of nations is much broader than can be defined even by a single family unit. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the question. It's a great question. Okay. Our next question is from Camillapard, and he asks, is the grace of God salvation conditional, i.e. through recognized need for a savior and faith in Mashiach? If not, would that give credence to universalism? Or is Mashiach able to save whomever he pleases regardless? If so, would that mean that any all souls in hell aren't loved? Loaded question, but they come from a conversation I had early in the week. Okay, now that is a good question, and it's actually really, really a hotly debated one. You will have people like, say, hyper-Calvinists who will basically say, hey, God chooses, you can't do anything about it, that's it. Once he chooses you, you're done, you have no free will in all this. I think the truth here, well, I should say, on the other side of this debate is the Arminians. And the Arminians are going to take, a hyper-Arminian is going to, on the other hand, go, well, you're free to choose to enter and leave salvation at any time. Yeah, it's conditional, but you can change your mind all the time. You can be saved, decide to be saved one day, decide not to be the other, decide to be saved again, then not. So this is a hotly debated topic. Now, I think, like all things, the truth lies somewhere in the middle. I think that the extension of grace is the invitation for salvation. It's the invitation. This is what I would suggest is, say, what's meant by predestined in, say, for example, the book of Romans. So for those God foreknew, he predestined. It's very, very similar to being like the chosen people. It gives you that invitation for salvation. Okay? But you're under no compulsion to take it. If you decide you don't want it, you might have been predestined to receive the message. And really, that's not predestined unto salvation. It's predestined to be in a community where you hear the message. If you were predestined to hear the message and you decide not to take it, well, that's your choice. So Messiah is able to determine who gets to hear the message. God determines who gets to hear the message. However, at the same time, too, as I said, you're not under any compulsion, but at the same time, everyone who will be saved is already foreknown to have been saved. And some of this comes down to just the pure infinite knowledge that God has of events both in the past and the future, conditional and otherwise. So God's omniscience allows him to determine and know the fullness of the Gentiles, the fullness of those who will be saved. So in one respect, everyone who will be saved is already determined. It's already a known quantity. But those people who will be saved are not being forced into the decision. They're just afforded the opportunity, and they just decide to do it, and God knows they're going to do it. So there is a conditional aspect to salvation. You can choose not to be a part of it. God's not going to make you do it, because that's just not how the gospel works. It's good news. It's not compelled news. So, and frankly, there are both. I mean, I hate to draw the Calvinist Arminian lines, because I think in many respects this is a tempest in a teapot. But I also think that there are also Calvinists who would more or less take that view, that grace is a determined thing. God chooses who gets grace. But it's ultimately, if you have gotten that grace and you are in that sort of elect position, you will choose it of your own free will, even if God sets up everything for that to happen. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. It probably doesn't. I mean, as I said, this is a long-standing debate, and it's really hard to cover this in 3 minutes. So I hope that at least shed some light on the subject. So anyway, thank you very much for the question, and I hope you got something out of that. Okay, question 3 is from 501 Mobius, and he asks, wouldn't it be interesting to do a video where you ask ChatGPT AI Bible questions and critique the response? Well, ChatGPT AI is a hot thing right now. In fact, what I hear is they don't actually have the capacity to meet their demands. But I also think, too, that ChatGPT AI has a tendency to give common knowledge answers. Very, very much has a tendency to give common knowledge answers. It will also blend various different views, and it also has it tends to go with, say, sources that are easy for it to find. So if a source is highly available, it tends to favor that source over, say, something that's much, much less available. So now I did look into ChatGPT AI with the idea of wanting to play with it. However, it's expensive. It's not cheap. It is a paid for service. So, I just looked at that and went, yeah, I'm not that curious. I'm sure it's going to be a continued issue, though. I will say that. We might, if the price comes down or they offer a free version of something similar to ChatGPT, we might do something like this, where we ask it Bible questions and, critique those answers. Just so, say, people will Because I think ChatGPT is going to be the next Wikipedia. I really think it's going to be the next Wikipedia. It's not free yet, but it really is something that's can fill that sort of slot that Wikipedia has had in the past, and perhaps give more satisfying answers. I didn't say correct. I said satisfying. What I mean by that is that I think ChatGPT AI has answers that are more able to please people than, say, the anonymized writers that you find on Wikipedia. So, yeah, it's going to reflect back to you the sort of answer you want to receive. So in many ways, it's going to massage what you already believe. So I think that's also part of the danger of ChatGPT also. So there are concerns there, and I think there's some ethical dilemmas that are going to need to be engaged. But at the same time, too, it would be fun to ask them questions like, who was the pharaoh of the Exodus? That would be very interesting, I have to admit. What was the date of the Exodus? Where was the Sea of Reeds? I think these would be very, very interesting questions to ask ChatGPT. So anyway, I think it's a great question. Wanted to take it. Thank you very much for the question, and I hope that gave you some food for thought. Okay, our fourth and super chat tonight is from Superjan, and this person asks, early bird gets the worm. Would an early dater of the Exodus have any arguments they could use to substantiate it, and do later date proponents of the Exodus run into any problems? Well, I'm sure some do. The fact is, when it comes to debates, and that's sort of where these things get tested out. And they don't really get tested out so much in the academic papers because in the academic world, most papers have to meet a kind of peer review to get published. And early daters have a real tough time getting their papers published, mostly because of low quality concerns. So they've consistently had that problem. On the other hand, those who have, say, run into, say, later Exodus date proponents don't so much have a problem, say, publishing as much as having people be interested in the debate. So each one of these is sort of tiers of knowledge is going to have, say, different priorities and concerns. And thus you get early daters really want to focus on, say, their roles as missionaries. So they tend to take their messages more to churches, apologetics conferences, that sort of thing. Whereas most late date proponents tend to want to restrict what they do to academic conferences. So it's two different worlds. And in most debate situations where basically the only time that they really sort of talk to each other, the early daters don't quite do so well. And there's a long history of this. It's not just, say, my recent debate with, say, Kennedy and myself, but it's also, say, Hoffmeyer versus Ailing, or, other debates like this. Now, those debates don't happen very often because the early date proponents have a lot more to lose than the late date proponents. But at the same time, too, I have not found an argument that the early daters have presented so far that has really stumped me. So I have been surprised occasionally by an argument that they might do, because you wouldn't think they would do something like that, because it's kind of silly. But I wouldn't really call anything that they did really sort of, as I said, a brain teaser. Now, on the other hand, could they come up with something that could substantiate their position? Yeah, sure. You know, things happen. You know, there's always, always surprises in archaeology. And I'm fully prepared to admit that, maybe the early daters will come up with something someday that will be really compelling evidence. And at that point in time, I'm more than happy to become a early date Exodus proponent. So, I mean, I have already been an early date Exodus component. Now I'm a late date Exodus component. I don't mind going back. Doesn't mean that much to me, as long as the evidence is compelling and can be reconciled to the other evidence. That's the other big factor. It's not just enough to have one key, say, silver bullet of evidence. You need to be able to engage all the evidence. If you can engage all the evidence, I have no problem going back to being an early dater. So far, they have not been very successful at this. So I'm just going to leave it at that. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciated. Okay. Now on to the super chats. Our first super chat is from Cole Walker for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. A couple of questions from Enlightened Quack. Well, I'm glad he got his questions on through your sponsorship. Thank you so very much for sponsoring that. Were Horus and Atum ever conflated? No, they were never conflated. Atum is a creation god. He's more associated as a solar deity. He's a creation god, and where he was eventually merged with Re. So you get a merging of basically a merging of Atum Re, but you don't ever get a sort of a merging of Horus and Atum. That just never happened. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. And that's sort of the quick answer here. Okay. The next super chat here is from Cole Walker for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he asks, is the incarnation of Horus and Pharaoh the same or similar to the incarnation of Jesus? Oh, no, not similar at all. No. In the case of Jesus, he was fully God and fully man. And the incarnation of Jesus is that he is the incarnation. He is the second person of the Trinity made flesh. Okay. So he is completely God and completely man. Now, explaining the hypostatic union, really, really difficult to do. Okay? That's sort of a question that's sort of beyond the level that one can really answer in a super chat. But we can answer about the incarnation of Horus and Pharaoh, because that is also well documented. In the case of Pharaoh, he is not born a god. Pharaoh is not born a god. He is just a human being. Yeah, he's got the constituents of a human being, a Ba and a Ka, which are, the intellect and the spirit. He also has a separate nature that sort of basically flies upon him and rests upon him when he becomes crowned as king. So essentially, when he becomes Pharaoh, the Horus bird flies from the dead king and rests upon Pharaoh. Now, you can sometimes see this even in some carvings. There are some statues that beautifully represent this, where you have the seated king, especially Old Kingdom statuary does this, where you see the Horus sitting behind the head of the king, and his arms or its wings stretched out in front of the king. It's really, really beautiful, and it's a really beautiful representation of how the Egyptians viewed the relationship of Horus and Pharaoh. So, Pharaoh, as a living person, as a fully grown adult when he takes the throne, becomes an incarnation and representation of the divine king Horus. But it's more along the line that the spirit of Horus rests over top of Pharaoh than Pharaoh becoming, say, a incarnation in total. So in this respect, Pharaoh is not fully Horus and fully man, like Jesus is fully God and fully man. Pharaoh is fully man with divinity wrapped around him. So I hope that makes sense. It's a little tricky if you try to compare it to Christian theology because they're different categories. But we also have to realize too that when Pharaoh dies, the Horus spirit leaves him. He's no longer an incarnation of Horus. He loses that. He just goes on to the afterlife and apotheosizes, becoming, say, godlike through the vicarious regeneration provided by Osiris. But he ceases to be identified with Horus at that point, at the point of his death, because the Horus has flown on to the next king. So it's not like Jesus, where Jesus resurrects and he's still fully God, fully man. So it's a very, very different sort of set of religious assumptions that go into both these particular narratives. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that explained it. Very, very much appreciated. Okay, our next super chat here is from Rachel Schonenberger for $10 Canadian. Thank you very much for the super chat. And she says, you have said the toponyms Etham and Pithom refer to the same place. Yes, I do. What are the reasons for thinking that they are the same place, and why was the writer of Exodus inconsistent with the name used? Okay, we'll get to that. Specifically, I'm thinking of your contribution to Behind the Scenes of the Old Testament. Footnote 7. Hoffmeyer has disagreed with this idea. Yes, he has. And there's a reason he has. Israel in Egypt, page 182. Ancient Israel in Sinai, page 69. Does he have valid reasons for rejecting this connection? Okay. I think what Jim has done, and I was trained by Jim, James Hoffmeyer. I love him. He's a great friend. I really, really appreciate his mentorship over the years. I think what's happened here is that he is in many ways responding to Manfred Gorg and others like William Propp, who have basically said that Etham and Pithom are the same place, but they're adding a little more to this. They're basically saying that Etham is the later version. Early versions of Pithom were spelled with the P, and then the P was dropped to produce Etham, and this is evidence of, say, multiple redactors in, say, the Pentateuch. And that's what Gorg and Propp are going to hold. So, this is where I think Jim sort of, and when you see James's rebuttals to this idea, he's more concerned about the implications that Gorg is placing on this change being a late addition, basically proof of redaction criticism. So I think that's really his concern here, is that the idea that you have Pithom, it drops the P, and I'll say later Iron Age context to become Etham. Thus, it shows that the Pentateuch was written over, centuries, periods of time. Okay, now, here's, I think, the problem with this. I think, in some respects, Hoffmeyer has thrown out the baby with the bathwater. I don't think you really need to do this. I think it is perfectly acceptable to say that Pithom and Etham are basically the same place. They're very, very similar in the itineraries. We don't find a separate Etham in, say, Egyptian literature. And Hoffmeyer already recognizes that the Egyptians dropped the P off of place names in Dynasty 19. For example, with Papyrus Anastasi III, we find both P. Ramses and Ramses used of the same place, which is Tel el-Kantir. So, Hoffmeyer already recognizes that this happens, and it's not an indicator of, say, later authorship. So, to say that Etham is a later construction of Pithom is basically to sort of ignore that the P dropping off of the Pithom is not evidence of later authorship, because we find that sort of thing done in Dynasty 19, and we even find it done in the same text. So I think even Hoffmeyer's sort of rejoinder that the later, that they can get it right in, say, Pithom, but they can't get it right later in Etham, I think it's wrong-headed. I think it's wrong-headed. I think both forms are right. They're both right. And they're both circa Dynasty 19. And we even, as I said, even in, say, singular documents, like we find in Papyrus Anastasi III, both forms of a place with a P and without a P are used. It just seems to be the writing convention of that late Bronze Age period where the P wasn't necessary. You could use it if you wanted to. You didn't have to use it if you didn't want to. That just seems to be pretty much what it is. There's no essentially compelling reason to include the P other than to be formal. It's basically you're using the P as a formal name, and then you drop the P when you want to use it informally. Like, for example, in Papyrus Anastasi III, our first sort of encounter with P. Ramses is P. Usur Ma'a Re Setep and Re Ramsi Mary Amun. It uses the whole titulary of Ramses II. And then it just goes, City Ramses. Just truncates it to really something very short and informal. So I don't think he has a valid reason for rejecting the connection. I think it's just he's just doing overkill here, just so he can. He's throwing out the baby with the bathwater. I don't think it's necessary. I think Gorg's proposal here is self-defeating all on its own. I mean, Gorg's proposal just can't stand up to the data. So I think Hoffmeyer's just going a step too far. He doesn't need to go this far. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Next super chat here is from Andrew Cahill for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Is there anything about ancient Egyptian religion that you find especially interesting that is not widely known among laymen? Ooh. I'm very fascinated by Egyptian religion. But for me, what I find always interesting is temples. Temples are so cool. I can just walk through a temple and just see just marvelous, marvelous things on the walls. Love temples. When When I see a sacred bark scene, and this is sort of what got me into sacred barks to begin with. Those layers, when I see a sacred bark scene, I see layers of sacred space. Likewise, when I walk into a temple, I am conscious when I go from, say, the peristyle hall to the hypostyle hall to the inner court to the septuagint or the bark chapel, that I'm entering into progressively more sacred places in space. And your average layman is not going to recognize that. They're not going to know where they are in that temple to know, okay, this is a place, I'm standing in a place right now where only, say, the most holy consecrated priest would stand. Versus, say, out in the peristyle hall, where you might get some nobility, some soldiers, some never the lower classes, but basically the middle classes could come and actually attend on special occasions. So I think that's one thing that I think is really, really interesting about Egyptian religion, is knowing where you are in these temples. That's what sort of really is always interesting. And I can just look at these temples and I can see, okay, there's certain iconography here in this section that you're not going to find in another section. So, as an Egyptologist, I'm acutely aware of where I am in the temple, should be going on in this part of the temple. And I think it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating, to see those sort of layers of separation that your typical layman's not just going to notice or appreciate unless someone points it out to him. So anyway, I think that's would be my answer to this, is basically, that whole sort of onion layers of sacred space. Just very, very fascinating stuff. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Our next super chat again here is from Andrew Cahill for $5. Thank you very much, super chat. Do you agree with Hoffmeyer's theory as to the location of the Sea of Reeds? That is, somewhere in the Bitter Lakes region. Generally, yes. Generally, yes. Now, I think we might just differ slightly on which lake, because there's a lot of lakes out there. It's an estuary. It's not just one lake. It's many lakes. So we might differ on which lake precisely, and I don't even think he has a exact location, and frankly, neither do I. But up in that Pelusiac estuary, we would both agree that would be where the Sea of Reeds is. So yes, we would agree on this. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay, another super chat here from Andrew Cahill for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. As an Egyptologist and biblical scholar, what is your opinion of the Prince of Egypt? Thoughts on it compared to the Ten Commandments? Okay, you have to understand that my memory of the Prince of Egypt is a little fuzzy. I've watched it a couple times, but it's been like over 2 years since I've watched it. So it's been a long, long time since I've watched the Prince of Egypt. Now, understand, this is a fuzzy memory. I just remember thinking there was a lot wrong with the Prince of Egypt. Okay? Now, I've watched the Ten Commandments a lot more recently. And one of the things I was really, really impressed with the Ten Commandments was the attention to detail. I had actually hoped to have done a popcorn review. I did this popcorn review on the Ten Commandments. But, YouTube's copyright system just, of course, kept smacking us around. So we were never able to show it. We were never able to show our popcorn review of the Ten Commandments. But fascinating how much interesting and accurate detail is in the Ten Commandments. Fascinating. Everything from the clothing to at least the Egyptian clothing. Not so much the Israelite clothing. The Israelite clothing was not so accurate. But the Egyptian clothing, the Egyptian dance, the board games. Now that impressed me. That board game of dogs and jackals. Very accurate. Very, very accurate. Just very interesting. So, I think that there is. I tend to, if I wanted to say to somebody, what would be your go-to pick for an Exodus movie? I would say the Ten Commandments. Now, the 1953, I think it's the 1953 version with Charlton Heston. I will say this about this, though. It's very long. And the whole love thing in the middle could be cut out. You cut that gratuitous love narrative in the middle of that Ten Commandments, you've got a great film on the Exodus. It doesn't need that bit in the middle. It's long, it's drawn out, it's obnoxious. Just jump from, the marriage of Zipporah right to, the Mountain of Fire, and hey, you've got a good movie there. You've got a really good movie. That's only like 2.5 hours instead of 3.5. But okay. But it's a wonderful film. I highly recommend it. And as I said, I really wish I could just go through parts of the Ten Commandments without getting copyright struck, and really sort of tease it apart from an Egyptologist point of view, because I think it's fantastic. It's really a beautifully and well done movie. Now, one of the reasons I think that that Ten Commandments is really well done too is it had really great Egyptologists on staff, basically consulting it. I think that, like, for example, I think was Labib Habashi and Sir Alan Gardner or was it Raymond Faulkner, who were consultants on that film. He really picked top Egyptologists to consult on it. So I think it's very good. I liked it. I think it's very accurate. I think the one thing that I think is least accurate is the walls of water. I think the parting of the Red Sea is probably the least accurate portion of it. But every movie on the Exodus is going to get that wrong, because the walls of water aren't like what you see in the films. They're really temenos walls. They're sort of, how do I explain this? They're not straight up and down walls. They're sloping walls. They're how do I show this? They're meant to slope, so it's hard to go up the incline. So it's that kind of wall, not a straight up and down wall. So that's a very, very different perspective that you'd only get through careful reading of the biblical texts, not so much from the movies. Plus, the water wasn't nearly as deep as they show in the movies. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I hope you found that interesting. Okay, our next super chat here is from Mr. Rich B.O.B. for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. And I think we've lost some super chats already. Oh boy. Just a second here, guys. Might need to cut and paste. Yeah. I have one greens is fine, but I think after... Yeah, I lost trunks already. Yeah, I know. I had it in... Yeah, it's already timed it out. I hate when it does that. I have up to the first one I have, next one I have is Amir Ashafra. So I'm going to have to take some time here to cut and paste some stuff. So I'll get to your super chat in just a moment here. I was afraid of this. This is one thing I really, really hate about all these scrolling softwares is they time out. Yep. And some of these will time out very fast, unfortunately. Okay, so no, I don't think so, but well, we did say there was going to be technical problems tonight. Unfortunately, I don't think there's going to be any way to fix that. Uh, most live streams do not get the number of super chats we get or questions. So for us, we have sort of special needs here as far as that goes. But I'm glad we sort of caught this before we lost any. So do please be patient. We want to make sure we get everybody's question. Okay. Well, isn't this fun? Yeah, it had truncated a lot of them. I'm going to have to keep an eye on the others too because of this. Yeah, well, I don't think we haven't lost any, but I know they'll eventually time out on YouTube also. So that's the dangers if they time out on YouTube. So I do have to take the moment to do the cut and paste here. Yeah, very few live streams actually store up questions and that sort of thing. Okay. Okay, I think we're caught up here, but I'm going to have to keep a close eye on this. I've cut and pasted up to Amir Eshafra's question on Isaiah 6:1. All right, let's get back to the super chats here. Mr. Rich B.O.B. for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Any explanation from manna? Heard some plants secretes sugar crystals at dawn. Thoughts on William Prop's two-part commentary on Exodus. Prop is a secular scholar. I think he's a good secular scholar. I agree with some of his ideas. I disagree with some of his ideas. There's I think some of his ideas are kind of bad. I think some of his ideas are fantastic. Like many scholars, there's good and bad in us all. There are people who think some of my ideas are bad, some of them are good. And I think that's sort of the approach we all take when it comes to serious scholarship, is that nobody has all the answers. But, would I recommend it? No, not necessarily. But then again, if you're a serious scholar, you're going to read widely. So I have used props commentary. I don't use it a lot, but I have used it. So that's sort of my thoughts on prop. As far as mana goes, the whole mana thing is very debated. Now, there's all sorts of different theories for mana, and nobody has the answer. Part of it is that the ecosystem itself has changed a lot since the Exodus, since the Late Bronze Age. So the ecosystem as it is today is very, very different than the ecosystem of the Late Bronze Age, which was a savanna. But today, the Sinai is a desert. Back in the Late Bronze Age, it was a savanna. So a lot of different life forms that could have survived out in the Sinai during the time of the Late Bronze Age may not exist today. Could there be some plant that secretes sugar crystals at dawn? Maybe. But I haven't heard of that per se. I've heard of plants producing resin that sort of falls, but again, the thing with mana is it appears on the ground and it appears at dawn. And then it's gone by noon. It's gone by noon. If this was just something that produced sugar crystals, it wouldn't be gone by noon. It would have hardened into crystals. The crystals are already hard. It wouldn't have gone away. So I wouldn't take that explanation. Now, I think I know of one sort of thing that does basically pop up in the morning and can burn off by noon, which is fungi. Basically mushrooms. There are species of mushrooms that, in sort of the humidity of the morning will pop up. They'll produce their fruit, and then by, say, end day, midday, they've died off. Completely possible in the mushroom world. It's also true that mushrooms have a huge variety of flavor as well. They might, you get mushrooms that taste like meat, like bread, like sugar. There's one that tastes like honey. So mushrooms do have the capacity to have a whole lot of different flavors. So I can see that there's a possibility that what you had, say, in the savanna of the Sinai was a kind of mushroom that sort of sprung up in the morning, had to be collected before it sort of faded in the heat of noon. So anyway, that's sort of my view on this. That's my theory on this, but no one knows for sure. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay, the next one here is from Lion Green for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Where did Hannah get the idea of an anointed king before Israel had an established monarchy? 1 Samuel 2:10. All right, Samuel 2:10. Verse 10. All right. Those who contend with the Lord will be shattered. Against him he will thunder in the heavens. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth, and he will give strength to his king and will exalt the horn of his anointed. Okay. Now, kings were always anointed. That was part of the, the process of investiture. Being a king in the ancient Near East, and frankly, this was not just restricted to Israelite kings, but other kings too were also anointed. It's just one of those things that you did find, and typically they were anointed with perfume. So perfume, incense, that sort of thing. You do find, say, Egyptian kings also being anointed. So it was a practice that wasn't restricted to Israel. So being that they were surrounded by, say, Philistine and Canaanite nations, they would have easily have known that this was the practice for basically anointing kings. Is you basically anoint them with oil or perfume or, purify them, basically cover them with the smoke of incense, and that would serve to purify the king for the reception of the crown. So again, common practice in the ancient Near East, and that's where she would have got it from, is that everyone knew that this is what you did to anoint kings and priests. Priests were done, the investiture of priests were often done in very similar ways than as the investiture of kings. So the two practices of basically consecrating a king or a priest for office involved very, very similar rituals. So she would have been aware of this. She would have easily been aware of this. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that helped. Very, very much appreciated. Okay, our next super chat here is... Oops, did that one twice? All right, there's one duplication here. Let me see if I can find the issue. Okay. From 499 super chat from Rorik, who asks, what prompted modern Egyptologists to change the spelling Tutmos to the modern Tutmosis? Okay, a couple things. One, Tutmos is basically based upon the Greek. Greek transliteration is not very accurate. It's not very accurate at all. And that Greek, we get Tutmos from a Manetho, who basically takes the king's list and transliterates it into Greek. So there is a whole lot of issues here with the whole transliteration. In fact, it's oftentimes very, very difficult to understand which king is being referred to in the Greek, because the Greek alphabet is not very good at transliterating a lot of languages. In the case of, for example, in Egyptian, you got 2 Ds, 2 Ts, 2 S's, 4 H's, and 3 silent letters. Greek is totally incapable of capturing the phonemes of that language. In fact, it's the alphabet is so bad at it that when Greek letters are finally used for the Egyptian language, the Copts have to introduce 6 additional letters to sort of cover the inadequacies. So modern Egyptologists would like to make the spelling more consistent with its original Egyptian counterparts. So in the case of Tutmosis, there is the original in the Egyptian is Jehudi Mosa. Now, most people are not going to recognize Jehudi Mosa as Tutmosis. Tutmosis is too enculturated in our society and in the field. So they sort of did this compromise, to be honest, which was you change the U or the O, that hard O, with a U, because it's Jehuti, and replace that second theta with a T, a dental T. So it's an attempt to try to make it more Egyptian. And, actually, to be honest, I kind of prefer the modern version. Because I don't think the Greek version just really did it justice. So anyway, that's what prompted Egyptologists to make that change, is to try to make it more consistent with ancient Egyptian, even though they couldn't do it completely. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it, and I hope that explains the history of this. Okay, the next one here is from Lion. Oops, we already did that one. See, I didn't change that one either, so let's go change that. Oh, looks like I copied the same one like 3 times. Okay. Next one here is from Andrew Goulet for $20. Thank you very much for the super chat. When it comes to archaeologists who disagree with you on the Exodus dating, which are many, like Scott Stripling and Tyus Kennedy, how good is their research on later periods, like the United Monarchy? I'll say this, it gets better the closer you get to the Christian era. I think, say, for example, Kennedy's work on Christ's evidence for Christ isn't horrible. It's not horrible. His work on the Exodus is atrocious. It's atrocious. And Scott Stripling is not much better. The United Monarchy, I think they're both a bit better. Okay? But Stripling, ABR still tend to want to massage the data to get the results they want, and that's always going to be a problem with them. Now, by the time they get to, say, the Christian era, almost everyone agrees, as far as, say, within, say, conservative Christian circles, as to, say, the specifics of the life of Christ. So there's no incentive there for them to really, distort much of anything. So I think at that point, it's not bad. It's not bad. But the earlier you get, the more incentive there is to sort of tweak the facts, ignore the evidence, do things that would just not be considered, say, sound, archaeological practice. So, it's going to depend. It's really going to depend. I think, for example, say the archaeological work that Stripling did at Shiloh, I think, he's an excellent field archaeologist. He's a really, really great field archaeologist. I mean, I'll tip my hat off to Stripling for that. His field archaeology is excellent. His reports, not so good. The way he interprets things, not so good. And they are materially different skills. The skill of gleaning data from the archaeology is a completely different skill than the process of digging up, recovering, and conserving archaeological finds. And I think as far as that latter category goes, Stripling's excellent. He's an excellent field archaeologist. He can organize a dig. He's very good at organizing a dig. He's very, very good at organizing volunteers and getting them to do the work. He's very, very good at getting those volunteers to pay the money. It's a big thing in archaeology. It is like herding cats. So, he's got his strengths, but he's also got his weaknesses, and those weaknesses are problematic. So, but it is true that the closer you get to the present, the better they are, because they've got less vested in, say, their presuppositions here. So anyway, thank you very much for that really generous super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. Okay, our next super chat here comes from... we had some more drop off. Okay. So I gotta go back and I gotta go grab some more. All right, there it is. So just a second here as I grab more super chats here. This is going to be kind of obnoxious. But at least there's less of them. So... Okay. Here we are. Whoopsie. Come on. Copy. Pretty please. Okay. Okay, we're getting there. Just a few more minutes here and then we'll be caught up so we don't lose any of these precious super chats. Yes, I am. I am catching up. Okay. Yeah, my queue right now only has 3 in it, so I know that it's timing out. So essentially, I'm rushing here to catch everything. Okay. Okay, I'm caught up to one of Addison Weir's. I'm just gonna, what I'm gonna do is I think I'm gonna just cut them all. Because otherwise I'm gonna have to do this exercise again. Take them as they come in. Photoshop. Well, the problem is how would I access it? Yeah, could do that. We'll have to think of a way to do this next Friday. So, yeah, because this is not going to be a permanent solution, obviously. Okay, I've got 2 more to do here, and I'll be all cut up. Yeah. Yes, that's the last one I'm doing right now. Then I'll be all caught up. All right. Okay. Right. There we go. All right, caught up. Sorry about that. Again, I did say we could have technical issues tonight, and we did. So, uh, if we do get the opportunity to use that new social chat widget, it will probably be just for, say, maybe the last several non-super chats. So keep that in mind, so that if you have a non-super chat, you might want to save it to the end, because otherwise it'll fall off. So, Andrew Guler for $20. Thank you very much for the super chat. Do you think Judges 5:20 indicates that Deborah believed in the astrological power of stars to determine fate or outcomes? Well, let's take a look. So we'll pull up our Bible here. Judges 5:20. Judges 5, verse 20. We'll start at verse 19. The kings came and fought. They fought the kings of Canaan at Tanakh near the waters of Megiddo. They took no plunder in silver. The stars fought from heaven. From their courses they fought against Sisera. The torrents of the Kishon swept them away. The ancient torrent, the torrent Kishon, O my soul, march on with strength. Okay. Now, the problem with this particular reading, and when you start dealing with things such as stars in the Bible, at least references to stars, is they also can refer. They're also, it's not just, they're not just saying that these are astrological powers. In fact, they're not saying that at all normally. Now, there are some references to astrology in the Bible. Like, for example, in the book of Job, it talks about Orion. Okay? But the power of stars is more angelic beings. Like, for example, when it talks, like, for example, when in Genesis 1, it talks where God created the sun and the moon and all the stars and all the heavenly host. The heavenly host here is the heavenly army. Okay? So there's this always this illusion when the Bible talks about stars to angels, spirits, basically a kind of spiritual warfare. And we see this again here in verse 20, where it says, the stars fought from heaven. So this is not a reference to astrology. This is a reference to the spirit world. That's what's being referred to here. And, as I say, it may be talking about watchers or spiritual powers or darkness in high places or angels or other kinds of spiritual beings. But it is a reference to that, using the analogy of stars. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. Okay, the next super chat here is also from Andrew Guler for $20. Thank you very much for the super chat. In 2 Samuel 12:31, it says that David, quote, brought out the people, Rabbah, and set them under saws, sharp instruments, and axes. Does this refer to method of execution or forced labor? Okay. Let's take a look at the text and find out. 2 Samuel 12:31. Okay, and we'll go back a little bit. We'll go back to verse 29 and read the passage. So David gathered all the people and went to Rabbah, fought against it, and captured it. Then he took the crown of their king from its head. Its weight was a talent of gold, and in it was a precious stone, and it was placed on David's head. And he brought out the spoil of the city in great amounts. He also brought out the people who were in it, and set them under saws, sharp iron instruments, or iron axes, and made them pass through the brick kiln. Essentially, brick-making works. And thus he did to all the cities of the sons of Ammon. Then David and all the people returned to Jerusalem. Okay? So, what's going on here? Essentially, what he did was he basically captured Ammonite cities and essentially, killed the king and basically took the people and put them to forced labor. This is essentially forced labor. So, made them use saws, sharp iron instruments, iron axes, and made them build bricks. So essentially, that's sort of the context here is that it's really what we're really talking about here is that David is increasing his wealth through the conquest of the cities of Ammon. And part of that increase of wealth is that those cities are being made to work and work for the purposes of the Israelites. Particularly David's own pet projects. So I don't think this is referring to execution. Because if it was execution, they'd probably be a little more blunt about this. Think of it more like being set under a bridle. So that whole set under euphemism is more along the lines of being oppressed. So he oppressed them under tools and equipment and made them work through the brick kiln. So that's I think what's going on here is this is forced labor. And it's forced labor basically in exchange for him not killing them. So I think this is, and this is not uncommon, to be honest. Suzerains did this all the time. Suzerains did this all the time. A king would come, capture, defeat a city. The people would be brought out. Okay, the people would be brought out. And we see, for example, in Middle Bronze suzerain vassal treaties where you have the king would win and then make the city sign a treaty. And then the people would be brought out of the city and passed between, say, animals that have been sacrificed and cut in half. And they pass through the pieces as sort of a covenant sign that if they broke the treaty, they'd end up like these animals. So, but instead of this is a kind of suzerain treaty. But instead of making them pass through the animals, he's consigning them to hard work and making them pass through the brick kiln, a symbol of labor. So it's suzerain-like. It's very suzerain-like, but it's a little different. He's not promising death. He's promising forced labor. So, better than death. Okay, but you know, it's a way of them paying the Israelites. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that helped, and a very interesting question. Okay, the next super chat here is from Andrew Guler for $20. Thank you very much for that generous super chat. Who do you think is the best candidate for Darius the Mede, who becomes king of Babylon in Daniel? Ooh. The identity of Darius the Mede is hotly contested. We don't know exactly who he is. And we're going to be straight up with that. We don't know who he is. Now, there have been people who've suggested that it's Darius the second. There has been even like Donald Wiseman suggested that Darius the Mede was actually Cyrus the second, the liberator of the Israelites in Babylon. So I don't have a firm opinion on this. I don't think there's enough evidence here to really basically say one way or the other. So unless I looked at this a lot closer and find more evidence, I'm going to have to take a pass on this one because I'm just not sure. Okay, I'm just not sure. I haven't done enough study on this to really come to a firm opinion on it. I know there's speculations out there, and I know there's more than one competing view on this. So I'm just going to have to leave it at that. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay, the next super chat here is again from Andrew Guler for $20. Thank you very much for the super chat. There are some ancient Jewish legends which say that Solomon summoned demons and used them to build his various building projects. Well, does this mean that the Jews didn't regard demons as absolute evil? No, it doesn't mean that. It's more along the lines that they thought Solomon was so wise and so proficient at the dark arts that he could take an evil being and make him serve Solomon for Solomon's own narcissistic tendencies. Okay? So it's definitely not, they're definitely not thinking demons were evil. Okay? But what they thought was Solomon was so wise and clever that he could even make a demon obey his will. So it's more along those lines. Now, of course, Solomon did not have that ability. And as far as we know, we have no good evidence that Solomon ever summoned a demon of any kind. But that's the thinking here. The thinking here is that Solomon was so wise, so powerful, so knowledgeable that he could even do this to the demons. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Excuse me. Okay, our next one here. Let's see here. Is from. Okay, I'm gonna have to start. Please. Okay, our next super chat. I need to change that size a little here. To get it all on the screen. Whoa. Nope, we're gonna move this down here so that it's easier to see. All right. Okay. The magic of software. Okay, our next super chat here is from Trunks for $5 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he writes, I have some anxiety regarding believing the wrong doctrines of Christianity. For example, the wrong church, the wrong view of atonement, etc. What do I need to do? All right. You need to essentially believe on, that Yahweh is Lord. Yahweh is Lord, and Jesus Christ is his only begotten Son who rose from the dead. And this boils down to this: the essentials of the Christian faith. Now, many churches have the essentials of the Christian faith. Now, it would help if I knew what your religious background was. This is a very, very vague question. And, not all churches, there's sort of little peccadillos that every church has that's maybe wrong. But, most churches will get things, at least most of the Christian faith right. Now, you do have organizations that aren't Christian. Okay, they're their own thing. Okay, they may look Christian, but they're not Christian. If they affirm the 6 essential tenets of the Christian faith, then they're probably okay. And those tenets are, say, the Trinity, the virgin birth, the sinless life, vicarious atonement, crucifixion, resurrection of Jesus Christ, the second coming, and salvation by grace through faith. If a church affirms those 6 doctrines, it's probably at least has enough right in it that you can come to a saving faith in Jesus Christ. Okay? So, I wouldn't worry too much about the wrong church or the wrong view of atonement. Atonement is by grace. It's by grace. Atonement was done by Jesus Christ. It's a finished work. It's done. It's complete. The gift of salvation is given to you by grace. And all one needs to do is accept it. Accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior and believe he rose from the dead, and you should be saved. It's really, really that simple. Okay. So unless I have more information from you here, it's very, very little more I can say on this, but that's probably the best we can do in a sort of a super chat live stream.
We also need to know, is he active?
Yeah, and as my producer points out too, we need to know a bit of your background here to know a little more about how to advise you anyway, because we need to know what your background is. Are you attending a congregation right now? Where are you at with the Lord in general? So those are difficult questions to sort of do a back and forth from on a live stream. But as I said, we on this channel try to be denomination, neutral. Yeah, we have our various strong opinions about every denomination. We think there's good points, strong points, and weak points with every denomination. So we don't recommend a denomination. We never do that. We never have done that, and we never will do that. Okay? Because we welcome all faith communities to watch these live streams. But if you're interested in Christianity, any sort of normal mainstream Christian church, has its pluses and minuses, but, you can find a saving faith through it. So anyway, that's the best we can answer this question, given the constraints we have here. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I hope that helped. Okay, the next one here. The next one here is from Billy Ningen for $20. Thank you very much for the super chat. Hello, Dr. Falk. Well, hello, Billy. In Benjamin Noonan's book, quote, Non-Semitic Loanwords in the Hebrew Bible, page 6, he mentions that there are scholars who argued that loanwords cannot be used to date texts. Can this argument hold water? Not really. The fact is that you can date texts by the vocabulary. You can date texts by grammatical structure. We do it all the time. And the reason we do it all the time is because most of the copies that we have of the text that we recover in an archaeological context are later copies, and sometimes millennia, centuries or millennia later than the originals. Like we will find in the late period Egyptian texts that are clearly written in Middle Egyptian. Well, how do we know it's Middle Egyptian? We date it according to its grammar and vocabulary. So if we can date those texts by grammar and vocabulary, it stands to reason too that you can also date parts of the Hebrew Bible by its loanwords too, for the exact same reasons. So I don't think the argument holds a lot of water. But with that said, however, the utility of that dating is probably less than you would find in other texts, because the pool of loanwords is smaller than the pool of general vocabulary. But what it does do is it provides the loanwords provide a vocabulary, basically vocabulary artifacts. They remain in the text as vocabulary artifacts. So if you do find words that can be dated, because of maybe change in suffix, going from one phase of a language to another, that can provide strong evidence for dating a text in general. So I would disagree with the argument, but there's also limitations to the extent that one can date in a loanword situation. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very interesting question. I hope that helped. Okay, Nick Felstead for $10 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Hi, Dr. Falk. Was there any credence for the Jebel al-Lawz site as the true Mount Sinai, or has this site been overhyped by Ron Wyatt and others? If so, what were your main objections? Ooh, boy, I have many here. Okay. Yes, it was overhyped by Ron Wyatt and others. Very, very overhyped. And I don't think there's any credence at all for Jebel al-Lawz as the true Mount Sinai. First of all, there's the biblical problem. Exodus 3:1 says that Moses went to Mount Horeb, and that's basically where we do find, say, the first reference to Mount Sinai. Now it's called Mount Horeb, but Mount Horeb and Sinai, all scholars agree that's the same mountain. Now, Exodus 3:1 basically says that Moses traveled west of the wilderness of Midian to Mount Horeb. Well, if he's traveling west to Mount Horeb, we're west of that wilderness of Midian, he's in the Sinai Peninsula. There's no escaping that. There's also the geographical problems of, say, the Exodus route, which is that when the Israelites leave Egypt, they go from Paramses through Sukkoth and Pithom, through Pi-Hahirot, and then they cross the Sea of Reeds. Okay. Now, Egyptian records tell us where all those locations are. They're all in the northwest portion of the Sinai Peninsula. They're a long, long ways away from, say, the Nuiba crossing. A long ways. For example, Migdol. When the Israelites are against, have their backs to the Sea of Reeds, they're trapped between Pi-Hahirot, Baal-Zephon, Migdol, and the sea. We know where Migdol is. We got reliefs of Migdol. The Egyptians have left us conveniently multiple reliefs of what Migdol looked like, and it's a fortress. And we know it's on the road of Horus in the northwest Sinai. So we even know where it is roughly. I mean, we haven't discovered the site, but we know where it is roughly because we have found other fortresses that are nearby to it. It had to be nearby the Lion's Den, and it had to be nearby Charu. So, and even Egyptian records, peg the geographical location of the Sea of Reeds between Pi-Ramses and Charu. So again, all of that is in the northwest Sinai. There's also the fact too that the Nuiba crossing is very, very deep. It's 800 meters at its deepest. That's really deep. And the problem is the text says that God sent a wind to drive the waters apart. Now, there are people who will try to make a supernatural case here. Basically, it's a miracle. It's a miracle. Well, okay, the sending of the wind is a miracle. But to produce a wind that would drive apart waters that are 800 meters deep requires a wind that has a force of 3,000 kilometers an hour. There is no wind in this solar system, maybe except on the sun, that is 3,000 kilometers an hour. You don't even find winds that powerful in Jupiter. This is crazy. I mean, this would require miracle upon miracle upon miracle upon miracle to make that work. Furthermore, I think the evidence that they have shown from, say, the Jebel al-Lawz site is, in my opinion, not compelling. This so-called altar site doesn't look like any Bronze Age altar I've ever seen. The split rock's weird, but you find a lot of split rocks in the Sinai. So, a lot of weird rocks in the Sinai, so, that's... The petroglyphs are problematic. Deeply, deeply problematic. Because the earliest records we have of that area have no mention of petroglyphs. We only start seeing petroglyphs there after it becomes a Christian tourist site in the 1970s. That's our earliest recorded evidence of those petroglyphs. So there's some issues there. There's really no evidence there of, say, late bronze inhabitation. It's problematic. It's a really problematic site in a lot of ways. And moreover, too, the contention that it's a volcano is complete bunk. It's not a volcano. It's not a volcano at all. There hasn't been volcanic activity in that area since before the Neolithic period. I think it's the early Holocene period that it had its last sort of geothermic activity, and it wasn't even volcanic. The supposed charring is desert varnish. I've seen desert varnish now firsthand. So, that's not charring, that's desert varnish. So, There's a lot of things about that site that sort of disqualifies it from being the real Mount Sinai. So anyway, that's where I'm going to leave this for tonight. I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. So in short, no, I don't buy that Jebel al-Lawz is the Mount Sinai one bit. But then again, too, I don't know where Mount Sinai is either. The geographic location is very vague. The only thing we know about it really is it's in the Sinai Peninsula. So thank you very much for the super chat and have a great night. Okay, next question here. Is from Mystery Flavor for $20. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he says, good evening. Well, good evening to you too. What are your thoughts on Galatians 3:17? How does Paul reach this number and why is it important? Also received my copy of your book and I'm already greatly enjoying it. Thank you. Well, thank you very much for purchasing my book. It was a labor of love. For those of you who don't know which book that is, it is The Ark of the Covenant in its Egyptian Context and Illustrated Journey. There's my name at the bottom. Okay. Yeah, I really loved putting that book together. I'd like to do another one very, very similar to that, with lots of great pictures, let's just say a lighthearted writing style, entertaining as well as educational. So, I'm really, really glad you're enjoying it, and my publisher thanks you. The fact is, if we're very, very close to earning out on that book now. For an author, that's a big deal. It's a big deal to earn out on a book, especially one that's hasn't been out that long, because it gives the publisher confidence that they can take a second risk on you. Every publisher takes a risk when they adopt a new author. So when a book earns out, that tells the author or the publisher that, hey, this guy's got some talent to write, so we might want to have him write again. So, as I said, we're really, really close to earning out. I think we're something like 50 copies away from earning out, something like that. So, yeah, very close. So, that would be very exciting to have the opportunity to write a second book with them. So, anyway, I'm glad you're enjoying the book. So, as far as your first questions, your thoughts on Galatians 3:17. Let's look at Galatians 3:17. So we're going to bring the Bible back up. Galatians 3:17. Okay. Okay. Now let's go back. Let's start at verse 16. Now the promises were spoken to Abraham and to his seed. He does not say, and to his seeds, as referring to many, but rather to one, and to your seed, that is Christ. What I am saying is this. The law which came 430 years later does not invalidate a covenant previously ratified by God so as to nullify the promise. Okay, where does he get this number 430 years? Okay, he gets it from Exodus 12. Flip over to there. Exodus 12. I think it's verse 40 if I'm not mistaken. All right, verse 40. Now, I am reading here from the New American Standard, which is actually based on the Masoretic text, and we'll talk about the textual problem here in just a minute. And it says, now the time that the sons of Israel lived in Egypt was 430 years. Okay, so that's where Paul is getting that number from. Okay? Now, this is the issue. The Galatians, Paul's writing in Galatians says, from the time of the promise to Abraham to the giving out of the law. That's at Mount Sinai. The Masoretic text just says there's time in Egypt. So, what's going on here? How do we reconcile this? Because Galatians does seem to allude that this time was stretched over, say, more than one location, whereas, say, the Masoretic text seems to restrict it to Egypt. Well, when you look at, say, other text variants of this passage, like the Septuagint, it will say that now the time the sons of Israel lived in Egypt and Canaan was 430 years. Likewise, when you look at the Samaritan Pentateuch, it will say that now the time the sons of Israel lived in Canaan and Egypt was 430 years. So both the Septuagint and the Samaritan Pentateuch are using the Egypt and Canaan in this Exodus 12:40 passage, which means that the original, the autographs, probably said Egypt and Canaan. So this makes it consistent with what's happening in Galatians 3:17, where Paul is basically saying that the promise began, or the 430 years began with the promise given to Abraham, who was living in Canaan, and went through to their giving a law in Sinai. So anyway, I hope that explains this. Thank you very much for the super chat, and it's a great, great question. Okay, our next one here. Okay, I just gotta make sure here that nothing is falling off here. Let's see. Okay, we're still good. Okay, so 21. Okay, our next super chat here is from Jared Gilmore for $10. And there's not enough room here, so we're going to have to kind of move it about a little bit. All right. Yeah, I saw that it's extended down. Okay. And he says, not enough room for question in super chat. See my following non-super chat question, which we did. I cut it all. And we'll skip by Kiara and 501 Mobius is here and go right to your supplemental here, which is, do you consider monophysitism, which Coptic churches ascribe to be in error, or do you think it is a valid theological conclusion for understanding the nature of Christ? What was the problem with it historically? Most other church traditions rejected it and adopted the two natures in one person view of fully God and fully man. Okay. Now, that view of fully God and fully man was resolved at the Council of Chalcedon. Okay? Now, do I consider monophysitism a error? Yes, I do. Okay, I'm going to be very, very blunt. Yes, I think it's an error. Because one of the things that monophysitism said was, when Christ was hungry, God was hungry. When God was omniscient, Christ was omniscient. So what it did was it confused the attributes of Christ's divine and human nature. When Christ bled, God bled. When God was created the world, Jesus created the world. Okay, it's a confusion of persons, and I think that's the problem here with monophysitism. Now, your modern day Copt is going to take a very circumspective approach to this, which is, they know there's a controversy that happened at one point. They don't really understand what the big deal is anymore, and they boil it sometimes down to just vocabulary. So, they don't hold hard and fast to monophysitism anymore. It's one of sort of almost one of those theological relics that you find in certain churches, where there was this debate, and at one point people were super passionate about it. Today, not so much. And this is true of all churches. You know, you get, for example, this sort of the whole Protestant Roman Catholic conflict. Most people can't articulate what the whole thing was about. Really, most people don't understand what the major point of contention was between Protestants and Catholics. Yeah, they'll say it's the Pope. They'll say it's Mary. It ain't. Okay? But very few people today can articulate it. Very few people can articulate what the differences are. In the case of this particular conflict, it was really a conflict between Monophysitism, the idea that there is a complete blending of traits between human and divinity, versus Nestorianism, which is his own error. Nestorianism said that there was a person of Jesus and a person, a Jesus who was divine, the person of Christ that was divine. They were two different and separate persons. And that would sort of defeat the whole idea of the incarnation. So there was definitely a theological argument happening there between, say, the Copts and the Nestorians. And in this is one of those cases where neither side was right. Just like you had a conflict between the Arians and the Apollinarians. And again, neither side was right. So, with that said, I think the problem is that it did say confuse the natures. It totally confused the natures, and the early church was very, very sensible about these things normally. So, I think it's one of those things that the Coptic Church stuck its guns to. It doubled down on Monophysitism because it was just Nestorianism was such a menace to them, and today it's not so big a deal. You'll find very few Nestorians around today. So, given that there's very few Nestorians around anymore, yeah, it's not a big issue anymore, and most Copts don't even hold to it. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay, our next one here is from Addison Weir. And he says, "See Facebook Messenger for an amusing interaction I had the other day." Okay, well, I can't really do that on OBS, but I'll take your word for it, and I'll go take a look later, okay? Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Yeah, I've been having a lot of amusing interactions recently, so wouldn't surprise me to get one from you too. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay, our next one here is from the Camelopard for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Is it possible that Judas Iscariot repented? Ooh. Matthew 27:3, or does Yeshua's statement Matthew 26:24 imply otherwise? Alrighty. Let's talk about this one here, because this one is a sticky wicket. All right, let's go to the, quote, repentance. All right, Matthew 27. And let's start. Well, we can actually probably go right to verse 3. Then when Judas, who had betrayed him, that's Jesus, saw that he had been condemned, he felt remorse and returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. But they said, what is that to us? See that to that yourself. And he threw the pieces of silver into the sanctuary and departed, and he went away and hanged himself. Okay. Now, Matthew 26. Verse 24. These are the words of Jesus Christ. The Son of Man is to go just as it is written, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been no good for that man if he had not been born. Now, there's one more passage I think we need to consider here. I'm going to try to look it up here. There it is. Which is John 17:12. And this is a prayer God gave to the Father at Gethsemane. And he says, while I was with them, I was keeping them in thy name, which thou hast given me. And I guarded them, and not one of them perished, but the son of perdition, that the scripture might be fulfilled. Okay. So here we have 3 passages. The first passage with Matthew 27:3, where Judas Iscariot feels remorse. He feels remorse and tries to return the silver. And priests aren't having it because it's now blood money. You know, they are not going to want that. Yeah, no hypocrisy there, but yeah, they aren't going to want that. But Judas's response is not to accept Jesus Christ as his savior, but to go and hang himself. He still rejects Christ in the end. He still rejects Christ. He feels the weight of what he did. But there's a lot of people who feel the weight of what they did. A lot of people feel guilt. A lot of people feel guilt over what they did. You know, guilt is a very, very powerful thing. And that's because sin is a very, very powerful thing. It has the power to destroy, to corrode, to disintegrate the person. And guilt is a side effect that a person feels as a result of the corrosive effect of sin. So that's a very, very important thing here when we talk about Judas Iscariot. He's feeling remorse. He's feeling regret. He wishes he hadn't done it, but he didn't. But he did it anyway. And his response is to kill himself, not to seek the risen Savior. Or at that point, confess his sin to Jesus. Okay? So, the second part of Yeshua's statement here, where he's in Matthew 26. Just go back here for a moment. Verse 24. So it says, the Son of Man is to go just as written him, but woe is that man to whom the Son of Man is betrayed. Now, while that's a woe, it's not really that clear what is the eternal destiny of Judas. So this is the point where things are a little vague. So it's a woe, but some church fathers have noted that there's still the possibility that he could be saved here. Okay. But that final passage of John 17:12 is really what puts sort of the nail in the coffin here. While I was with them, I was keeping them, and he's talking about his disciples here, keeping them in your name, which you have given me. And I guarded them, and not one of them perished except the son of perdition. And perdition here means destruction. It means destruction. Apoleia. This is there's the the destroying angel Apollyon that's mentioned in the book of Revelation. And that's what we have here is the son of destruction, he who's going to be destroyed. And that the scripture might be fulfilled. Okay. So that's sort of the point where it puts the nail in the coffin. So I don't think there's any possibility that Judas Iscariot had a saving repentance. And I think scripture is pretty clear about this. So anyway, thank you very much, the Camel Leopard. Great question. It is one we sometimes get, and it's a really, really good question, and it's one that actually I think needs to be better delineated, because you do get especially universalists who say even Judas Iscariot will be saved. And I think this is very much clear evidence that not only is Judas not saved, but he will never be saved, and thus is defeats the whole idea of universalism. So thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. Yeah, good deep question. Love it. Okay, Amir Eshafra for $5. How would you parse Isaiah 6:1? Well, first of all, I'm going to need it in a text that I can read in my size. So, because my eyes are old. Isaiah 6, verse 1. Go into the Hebrew. Can't find where you are exactly there. It's Isaiah 6:1. Who shall they? I found it here. Oh, you would ask that question. Oh, wow. Oh, that's a nasty question. Dude, after all the trouble I got into in the last couple weeks. It's the skirt of the robe. No. Yeah. And his skirt, basically, the text read, and his skirt filled the temple. Okay? No. We are not going to answer that question. We are not answering that question. I will just say this. I do not take Stavro.
Don't even say her name.
I won't take Dr. S's.
Don't even say it.
Opinion on this, but I'm not gonna answer this question. Yeah, we're not. Yeah, nothing on this. Nothing on that topic until this whole thing sort of dies down. Okay. So, and we would appreciate none of that. Okay. But I do appreciate the super chat. Okay. Okay. Addison Weir for $1.99. Who was the dullard pharaoh you couldn't recall? It's one of the Ptolemies. I can't remember exactly which one. I don't remember if it's Ptolemy the 11th or 12th, but it's one of those. It could even be the 13th. It's one of the late Ptolemies. He was a real dullard, but I don't remember which one it is exactly. Yeah. Just turn this off for a moment here. Yeah, Amir Eshafa, I was just asking how you would parse it, not Dr. S's eisegesis, laugh out loud. Yeah, but it's such a touchy subject right now. You know, um, I wouldn't definitely not take her views on this. Okay. So that's gonna be the end of it. Okay. Yeah, back to Asinwir's question here. Yeah, it was one of the Ptolemies. I can't remember which one exactly, and that's because a lot of them are very similar in the biographies. But yeah, the last couple Ptolemies were not so bright. So anyway, I just can't remember exactly which one it was. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Uh, Camel Leopard here for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. Tad too long. Dig a little deeper down. Okay. I probably have to cut and paste it because I probably didn't cut and paste it. Um, okay, where is it? Okay, tad too long. Dig down. You see his question?
Yeah, this right underneath
Uh,
blue, and then his again. Super chat is technically.
oh, okay, okay, I see it. All right. All right. Okay, I got it. Yeah, I'm gonna need to cut that. Okay. Okay. Okay, and the Camel Leopard's question here is for SC. Does mimicry in animals imply a form of deceptiveness in the creator? The whole question of deception is an interesting one anyway. The Bible is not clear on, let's say, the sinfulness of deception. Like for the commandment to bear false witness is not about deception. It's about legal proceedings. Essentially, you go to court, you tell the truth in court. That's what it is. It's really not so much about, say, using deception for particular ends. It's not, and there are times when, say, deceptiveness is used by, the creator. For example, you do have that incident where the Lord asks for volunteers, evil spirits, to go deceive Ahab. We also do see it in other, normal practices too. Like, for example, to deceive, somebody in war. You have an enemy that's prone to do massacres of civilians. So you leak information that a bunch of civilians are holed up in this building, and instead you set up an ambush. That's a kind of deception. But it's a deception used to trap someone who's about to wants to do something incredibly evil. They're not innocent parties. So there's a lot of moral debate over the whole idea of deception. So we do know that there are times when, say, the creator does deceive men who are inclined to do evil things so that they are hoisted by their own petard. So we do see this at times. Now, I don't think you need the mimicry of animals to imply that. You can just go to scripture to get that. We even have Jesus basically saying, he's, his family goes to the temple. And, he says, now I'm going to stay behind. I'm going to stay behind here. And then later on he goes and to the temple in disguise. Of course, they try to stone him, but yeah, he goes to the temple in disguise. Now, that was a form of deception. But it was deception for a higher purpose. So, that's a lot of this is that the whole sort of idea of, say, whether or not deception is right or wrong depends a lot on circumstances and where it sort of fits in, say, more nuanced moral frameworks. So you have to take a more compatibilist view, like what's the higher purpose here in deception? Is the purpose of deception here to achieve a more moral goal? You basically, might have to deceive a patient to take, medicine for their own good. It's possible. Like for example, say my mother's dying, and she doesn't want to take her pills. Well, you say, well, go take them there, that, you need them, or, slip them into her food or something, so that she takes them. We do this with our rabbits. Sometimes if we have a rabbit, okay, we have a rabbit, okay, who you couldn't force feed medicine. Too strong, too big. There's a big Flemish giant, just incredibly strong animal. You could not force feed that animal. So what we would do to feed him medicine is, we'd feed him a piece of parsley. And as the parsley was going in the mouth, the syringe followed right alongside it and slipped right in, and we squirted in the medicine. Did we deceive the rabbit with using a piece of parsley? Yes. Did we do it for the rabbit's good? Yes. No problem deceiving in those circumstances. So, a lot of this is going to depend on what the claims and the outcomes of these things are. So context here is really, really going to matter. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that helped. Very, very much appreciated. Okay, we've had a few more drop off here, so I'm going to have to take a moment to pick up some more here. Let's see, where were we here? 2K is how do we understand X? Okay, so we're up to there. Oops, oopsie. Not ready for you yet. Okay, and give me a few minutes here as I copy some more over from So we can save them. Okay, get these C's here. We got slim 2Ks. Okay. Now we got linguist ammos there. Okay. Now we're getting close here. Caught up. All right. Okay. Actually, I'll grab the last two also, just so if they do time out, we will not lose them. Okay, we should be fully caught up. Yep. There's that last one from the ear. All right, where should we all cut up now? Okay, so our next one. Oops. 28. Okay. Our next one here is from the Camelopard for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Great Pharaoh Folk, is it true you are an incarnation of Horus? Well, I don't think I'm king, so I kind of doubt it. Thanks in advance, Dr. Falcon. No. Yeah. Oops, looks like we missed a couple here. All right, I gotta grab those. Okay, and okay. All right. No, not the incarnation of Horus, but I'm flattered. Okay, next one is here. Is from John Bullerman for $10 Canadian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Let's get that up there. Didn't change it. What happened? Changed the wrong one. Try that again. All right, there we go. And he says, for your AADF, you know what that means? Don't know what that means. My first ever super chat. God bless. Well, God bless you also. Thank you very much for the super chat. I'm glad you could join us tonight, and very much appreciate your joining us. And we also appreciate the contributions. They really, really do help us to stay on the air. It helps us to continue doing this work and to answer your questions. We love doing this work. We're here to basically help you understand the Bible better, to help you understand the ancient Near East, to get excited about this stuff. I mean, this stuff is so cool. So cool. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. I'm glad you could join us tonight. Okay. I see. Okay. I won't post that up there, BC, but okay, I get it now. I get the AADF reference. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Okay, the next super chat here is from the Camilla Part for $2. Thank you for the super chat. So, Pesach with Easter eggs and tortillas. There's actually a pretty serious story behind this. Pesach, for anyone who doesn't know, is the Hebrew word for Passover. Okay, it's Passover. Now, in some places, getting unleavened bread matzah is really, really difficult to get. It's really hard. For example, here in Vancouver Vancouver, it's really difficult to find matzah at a store. You know, you can go to specialty stores and they won't have it. It's considered to be an exotic ethnic food that they never carry because there isn't enough Jews living in this area to make it worth their while. So it's really difficult for us to get matzah when we want to celebrate the Seder. So I was looking around, and at the time I was investigating this question, I was essentially the administrative assistant at a Messianic Jewish congregation, and it struck me that the what you need for unleavened bread is essentially bread without leavening in it. So kind of cooked bread with leavening in it. Well, you know, okay, matzah, yeah, sure. You know, it's a dry cracker. It's actually not even really, frankly, matzah isn't even really bread. But, let's be blunt, it's more of a cracker than it is bread. But there was something that did sort of spring into my mind, which was tortillas, the other unleavened bread. Yeah, you know, and it struck me, you could make a tortilla without any leavening in it. No yeast, no baking powder, and it would be perfectly kosher for basically unleavened bread. You've got wheat flour, you've got olive oil, and you've got water. You have unleavened bread. Yeah, and unlike matzah, it actually tastes good. So I kept, you know, joking to my Messianic Jewish pastor, you know, yeah, tortillas, the other unleavened bread. And frankly, at times when we can't get matzah, we use that. And I think it's perfectly acceptable as long as it's cooked within a certain limit. I think that's the only limitation that I think the limitation for say Hasidic Jews is, for example, it has to be cooked within 17 minutes of having the dough having been prepared. And I don't know. I think they came to that because otherwise it would start self-rising. But for tortillas, that's no problem. You know, just knead it up, cut it up, fry it. You know, you're done. So it's like, yeah. So, you know, I love the Camel Leopard's joke here where he talks about having Easter eggs, which, you know, the egg that's used in the Passover Seder is both not supposed to be decorated. That might be crossing the lines. I don't know. But I'm not an authority on Jewish customs and law to really say that definitively. I only investigated the tortilla thing. Unfortunately, a lot of commercial tortillas have leavening in it, so you can't use a lot of commercial tortillas, but homemade ones, they'll work. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. Asking Weird for $4.99. You should react to TikTok videos. That'd be hilarious. Oh. Well, I do have a TikTok presence. I haven't done any reaction videos on TikTok. I don't know if I should. It's more. That's more the question. Is not could I? It's should I? I see the potential of getting into a lot of trouble with TikTok. Although, you know, it might be fun for some of them. Because some of them are way out there. I mean, there you get the strangest stuff on TikTok. So, you know, it might be good for a giggle. I'll say that. It might be good for a giggle. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. Okay, Polycarp Salavarita for 199. Thank you very much for the super chat. Are the stories of David in the Bible reliable? I think so. I know there are other scholars out there that disagree with me, but this is one of those things. The whole question of the story of David has been on a big pendulum swing. Now, 40 years ago, yeah, I'm dating myself here as to, um, you know, but 40 years ago, you would be hard pressed to find any biblical scholar anywhere that would have said that the Davidic narratives were reliable. Most of secular scholarship thought that David didn't exist at all. Now, fortunately, the pendulum has swung the other way. And we're now more or less quibbling over details. Secular and religious scholars alike now hold that at least David was a historical person. Whether or not he actually did all that he claimed is what's at stake now. Was the Davidic kingdom as large as it seems to purport? Is it as grand as basically, people imagine it to be? And that's a lot of this. A lot of the interpretation of, say, the Davidic narratives is as much imagination as it is exegesis. So when we talk about things like, for example, I know this when I deal with, say, stuff on the Exodus, is I'm not always dealing with what's in the text with most people, with even most skeptics. Most skeptics, I'm dealing with what they have imagined that the Bible is actually saying, not what it actually says in its historical context. I can probably relate that the same sort of debate is happening as far as the Davidic narratives go, where it's more, well, what does the stories of David in their context suggest, as opposed to what have, say, skeptical Bible readers imagine they represent. Because once you start dealing with the inflation of imagination, very few narratives are going to hold up to that. That's just I think one thing that we have to come to terms with when we deal with the biblical narrative, is because not everyone is versed at the same level of context. You're going to get different people with different ideas of what the texts actually say and what they mean. So, at a base level, I do think the stories of David in the Bible are reliable. But what does that mean as far as what that reliable interpretation is going to vary from scholar to scholar. And my view of, say, the Davidic stories might be a lot more humble than, say, some secularist who is basically trying to overinflate the Davidic narratives to sort of tear them down. So anyway, I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and it's a good question. Okay, BC for $10 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he says, how did the Israelites understand natural phenomena, for example, lightning? Did God cause everything directly, or did they conceive of nature as functionally independent of God, but something he could wield? Well, unlike, say, for example, the Greek god Zeus, who could throw lightnings around like spears, we don't get that imagery in the Bible. In many respects, there is in, say, the Old Testament a separation between nature and God. It's more along the lines that God could use nature, but wasn't the direct cause of it. You know, all you have to do is look at the book of Job to see this. You know, God in his poem, you know, questioning Job, goes through all sorts of natural phenomena, and yet seems to be separate from it all. You know, Job, raise yourself up like a man and answer me now like you, if you can. You know, what's the way of the home of the light? Can you understand the eagle fly? Can you put on glory and splendor? It's like there is this dichotomy in Job between what are these natural wonders versus what is a God, you know, transcendent away from that kind of wonder. And I think this is really, really important to emphasize that the God of the biblical narrative is not the God of the gaps. Not the God of the gaps. The God of the gaps is paganism. It's Baal standing on a bull throwing a lightning rod. That's not Yahweh. Yahweh has never been portrayed in the Bible as God of the gaps. So it never did portray lightning as being, say, you know, a, you know, direct cause, you know, directly caused by God. But it was more of a secondary natural event, an occurrence. So it's a very different portrayal of God. In fact, one of the interesting things about this, and I think one of the reasons why, say, God in the Old Testament is sort of portrayed more transcendently and maintains that sort of portrayal as transcendent deity, is because the Canaanite myth wasn't. You know, the whole storm cycle, the whole Baal cycle, is very intrinsic to God, to the gods being directly involved in natural phenomena. You know, you had Baal, the storm god, and he's creating chaos, and he's fighting the moat, the mu, the sea, and mut, the death, and then the cycle begins all over again after he defeats the sea and death. So those are deities in the Canaan pantheon that directly are responsible for nature. The God of the Old Testament is indirectly responsible. He's made the world and sort of lets it, you know, operate, only tweaking it and moving things around as he needs it, but is not directly responsible for generating electricity. So I think that's the difference here, is that God uses nature, but he's not part of nature. He's above nature. He's transcendent from it. And that's a very, very important consideration when we look at, say, the Israelite understanding of natural phenomena versus, say, the Canaanite understanding. Excuse me. I'm sneezing a lot tonight. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. Our next one here is from Aston Weir for 4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Have you heard that Answers in Genesis is now going after their fellow young earthers, specifically those they call young earth evolutionists? No, I haven't. I don't keep a lot of tracks on Answers in Genesis. Occasionally I hear snippets here and there, but it does not surprise me that they would go after young earth evolutionists. I can see that as being antithetical to what they believe, because they do believe in ex nihilo creations. So yeah, that wouldn't surprise me one bit. But very interesting, though. Very interesting that the defining line here is that not the line in the sand is not necessarily the young Earth. It's more the creationist, evolutionist bit. So very, very interesting. Very, very interesting indeed. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. Let's see here. BC for $5 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he says, it seems the Gospels are collated from prior written sources such as the famed Q. What do you think happened to these? Why don't we have any? Well, my opinion of Q is, could it exist? Possibly. Does it matter if it exists? Not really. I think a lot is made of Q. A lot is made of Q that I think is really hyped in both directions. Now, a lot of people have, especially liberal scholars, have thought that Q is just a collection of pithy statements that just Jesus did, similar to what the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, a very late document, at least for a gospel, that is nothing but a collection of pithy statements. Essentially, the Gnostics rewrote these Gospels, and stripping out any of the theological narrative bits and just left the sayings of Christ. So, and from that, they've sort of inferred the existence of a Q document that predated, say, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But frankly, I also don't think the Q document is necessary. I think it's perfectly explainable to do either Matthew or Mark in priority here and still come up with a reasonable outcome for all three Gospels. So I'm going to sort of, at this point, say, yeah, it doesn't matter. Q here doesn't matter. We don't have any evidence for Q, at least not being an early document. What we have evidence of is the Gospels. That's what we have evidence of. And we don't even have, say, proto-Gospels, which is very strange, too. We don't, like, for example, if the Gospels did sort of come to us over time from, say, a Q document, we'd also expect to find some proto-Gospels, too, and we don't find any of that. So what we're dealing with ultimately with the famed Q is a hypothetical document. A document that doesn't really exist. At least we don't have evidence that it exists. Maybe it does exist, but we don't have any evidence for it. So, we don't have it. And right now what we have is the Gospels. That's the evidence we have. So anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, the next super chat here is from Travis Garrett for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Do you have any recommendations for how to pronounce biblical names, places, Old or New Testament for English speakers who know no Hebrew or Greek? Well, if there was, I'd probably buy it myself because my pronunciation for just about everything is atrocious. So, you know, there is no. I don't know if there's any pronunciation guides other than what you would find at, say, beginning Hebrew and Greek grammars. So that's probably the only place you'd find pronunciation guides. But it's very, very difficult to pick up pronunciation. And you can develop reading competency in a language and never learn to actually speak it correctly. You know, I've been doing this now for, 18 years, and I still can't get the pronunciations right. You know, I can read it fine. I can't pronounce it to save my life. I mean, I can barely do English correctly. So, you know, this is just one of those things that I don't think there's a really good resource here to help you. That could be, but I don't happen to know any. So, sorry I don't have a better recommendation for you on this, other than to say Hebrew and Greek grammars. But that's probably the best I can offer you here. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. $37. Okay, our next one here is from Slim2K for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Hi, Dr. Falk. Well, hi, Slim2K. How should we understand Acts 16:31? Is it saying if I believe, me and my household will be saved, or is it commanding the whole household to believe? Ooh, interesting question. Let's find out. To my New American Standard here. And it's Acts 16:31. And all right, and let's pull that up. And they said, believe in the Lord Jesus, and you shall be saved, you and your household. Okay. So, let me go take a look at the Greek here quickly. Okay, this one. On Don Kyrion Ieson Kai Sozate you Kai with you. Okay. So I'm gonna parse this in my head here. Okay, there is that second person in pistuo to have belief upon the Lord Jesus. And you will be saved, you and your household. Okay. Now, I think the danger here is to think that the belief, one person's belief, can get an entire household saved. Okay? I don't think it's the former. I don't think it is the former that if one person believes that that belief is sufficient to cover the faith of the rest of the household. I don't think that's what this is driving at. I think it is more a command that the latter. It's a command that the whole household believe. So it is basically you, head of the house or whoever, you believe on the Lord Jesus Christ and you'll be saved. But not just you and your household. I think it's more along those lines. Because nowhere in the New Testament does it teach that the faith of one person can cover the faith of anyone else. So I think that's the guiding principle here, is that faith is not, say, communicable. My faith is not strong enough to cover, basically save my child, should my child choose not to believe. Every person has to come to faith on their own. Yeah. As much as parents would wish that their faith did cover their children, it doesn't. It doesn't. So I think this is really more along the lines of that it's a command to come to faith in order to be saved, but not just you. Not just you. You and the rest of your household as well. So I think between the options you presented here, it's the latter more than the former. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And 37, 38. Okay, Slim 2K again for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Can you explain Acts 13:1? Is it referring to skin color? This came up in a discussion I had with a Hebrew Israelite. Okay. Bible again here. (13:1). Now, there were at Antioch in the church that was there prophets and teachers, Barnabas and Simeon, who was called Niger, and Lucian of Cyrene, and Manaen, who had been brought up with Herod the Tetrarch, and Saul. Okay. I think what you're referring to here is to Niger, which in the Greek does mean black. It does. Now, we don't know, it doesn't say in what way he was black. That's going to be an issue here. Simeon is an Israelite name. It's an Israelite name. And the Israelites were a Semitic people. Okay. So these are in Antioch, these are diaspora Jews, essentially. So I don't think it's necessarily referring to skin color. It could be other things. It could be hair color. It could be eye color. He might have a huge, big black beard. He might have a monobrow. Big black hair, monobrow, black beard, and still be a white dude. It's possible. These are what's called epithets. These are what's called epithets. They are not. They're in Greek culture. You have a birth name, and you have an epithet. Okay. And in some ways, it's the epithet is the name you're given when you grow up. You get this epithet. So this is pretty common in Greek culture. Socrates. That wasn't his birth name. It was the name he grew up with. He had when he became an adult, and it means broad, particularly broad of face, meaning he's ugly. So, there's these epithets that that were done in Greek culture, and this is one of those epithets. We don't know why he was called that. Could it be skin color? Maybe. But it doesn't even necessarily mean he was, say, of African descent. It could even mean just that, he had dark skin, dark eyes, more tan skin. So, I don't think this necessarily implies race in any way. I think the Hebrew Israelites here are using the text for their specific ideological ends. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. $39. Okay, from Linguist Ammo for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Hi, Dr. Falk. Well, hi, Linguist. No question, but only cheers from one Scotch enthusiast for the other. Well, thank you. This week I haven't had any Scotch, so I'm kind of missing my Scotch. He says, I'm starting my THM with a focus on the book of Joshua. Been a while. Ooh, great book to do a THM on. I'd love to read it once you're done. Please send me a copy. So, yeah, this is wonderful. Well, good luck and go for it. Put all your zeal into your studies because it'll pay off. It'll really, really pay off. So, well, I'll drink one with you when you're done. So, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and best of luck. Okay, I have to. Okay, BC for $5 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. And he says, this is an anti-question. Use it to neutralize one of Addison's. Proceed to bed. Do not collect more questions. Thank you and good night. I'd love to go to bed right now. Hey, I mean, we've been going for 3 hours, I'm ready for bed. But no, we're gonna finish off the super chats tonight at least. So we don't have that many more to go, but we do still have some. So we're gonna try our best. All right. So thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. I gotta go back here and I gotta make sure I didn't miss any. Cause wait, hold it where? I see. Okay, yes, we did miss some. All right, and okay. Okay, our next one here is from BC for $5 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. You are marooned on a desert island. You can take 3 items with you. Plot twist. They're all ancient Egyptian items. What would you choose? Oh, dang. Okay. No, it wouldn't be a knife. It'd be an axe. I'd take an axe. Over a knife, I'd take an axe. In a pinch, I can use an axe like a knife. But you can't use a knife like an axe. So I take an axe. Okay, one of those Hyksos ones, something with some good chopping ability. What else would I bring? 3 items, all Egyptian. I would also bring a spindle to make thread. Spindle make thread. And I would bring a set of flint blades. These are all Egyptian items. At least with the flint blades, I can start fires with them if I have to. As well as make cutting instruments. Yeah, I can build everything else from there. So, there you go. It's an interesting question. It's a good one. It's a good one to make you think. Because once you got sort of those items, you can sort of make the rest. If you've got the ability to make string, you've got the ability then to haft. You can make more tools. You got the ability to make fire. You know, you can still make other things. So, yeah. And then just, an axe for basic shelter. To build basic shelters. So yeah, Egyptian tools don't last forever. So you're going to have the ability to make more. So, anyway, great question. Interesting question. Thank you very much for that super chat and that question. That was a very thought-provoking question. Okay. Next one. So I want to make sure. I'm going to make sure I've got that one next. Might have missed a few here, so I'm just going to make sure I get it. Okay, I did miss that one, so I have to capture that one. Okay, our next super chat here is from Gizbo SBOL for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Is annihilationism strictly a Protestant phenomena, or have you come across Orthodox and Catholics who hold to this position? Yes, I have actually. I've come across both Orthodox and Catholics that do hold to annihilationism. It does seem to be something that's sort of become very, very popular in recent years as globalism has sort of seeped into the church. Now, I'm not saying globalism is necessarily a bad thing, but this is a side effect of the church coming into contact with foreign unbelieving cultures. So it has become a lot more popular across all denominations in recent years. So I have encountered Orthodox and Catholics who also believe this. So it's not just Protestantism. Okay? So, yeah, I'm seeing it everywhere. I'm seeing it absolutely everywhere. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. Okay, make sure, let's go to the next one here. Let's see what the next one is. All right. Okay, actually, we might even just be able to, at this point, go to... All right. Addison's. So we actually are now onto the the software finally. All right. 499 super chat from Addison. Thank you very much for the super chat. An anti question. Neutralize BC's last super chat and any more requests of his. Love it. Love it. Dueling super chats at 50 yards. Well, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay, our next super chat here is from Gizbo SBOL. How is there enough time between Teru fleeing Urkesh and the events of Genesis 14 taking place if the Elamite occupation of Mesopotamia only lasted a couple of years per the Mari texts? Okay. The thing with the Elamite occupation, we have to really understand that when Terah was fleeing Urkesh, he wasn't fleeing the Elamites. He was fleeing his own people. Okay? His own people wanted him dead. That's because his own people didn't want to side with Mari. Now, we have to understand, too, that Terah was in contact with Zimri Lim. Okay? That reign did not last terribly long. It's the last reign of Mari before it too gets conquered by Hammurabi. So, what's happening is the sequence of events is that Urkesh is sort of trading hands between Mari and Elam. And what happens is Terah has basically thrown his lot in with the king of Mari, Zimri Lim. So at that point, he's fully aligned with the kings of Mari. And his people don't want to be aligned with Mari. His people really want to be more aligned with Elam. Now, which in some ways this sort of makes sense, because Urkesh is actually a lot closer culturally and geographically to the Elamites. So it's understandable that his people wouldn't want to side with Mari. But they basically have enough of him. They basically say, okay, we don't want you as a ruler. We don't want Mari. We're going to start, and violence breaks out. Violence breaks out. And it actually results in the death of one of Teru's sons. And we also know that, one of Terah's sons also dies. We don't hear about how he dies in the Bible, but in, say, the Mari letters, we learn that he dies as a result of the uprising at Urkesh. So he's got to get out of town. So he leaves and he heads to Haran. And what happens, though, is Elam is basically, subjugated by Babylon, as is Mari. They both end up being subjugated ultimately by Babylon. But there's enough time that, say, Babylon first conquers Mari. So there isn't a whole lot of, there's not a lot of time, say, between, say, Terah fleeing and the conquest of Mari. But there's still enough time there to it's still, Urkesh is going to trade hands a couple more times. But ultimately, Mari's going to fall before the Elamites do. And the Elamites are going to be sort of the last people that hang on to Urkesh. So after Mari falls, the Elamites are going to have that coalition with the Babylonians to precipitate the events of Genesis 14. So it's not so much that Terah flees, the Elamites are driven out by the king of Mari, and that's the end of the story. No, it trades hands yet again when Mari gets beat up by Babylon, and Babylon allies with the Elamites at that point. at that point, the Elamites are free to, annex again Urkesh until the Babylonians ultimately turn on them. So that's sort of the timeline here. So anyway, I hope that helped answer the question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay, another super chat here, a $5 super chat here from Gizgo SBOL. And he asks, what script and writing material would David and Solomon have used? Well, thank you very much for the super chat. It's a great question. David and Solomon would have used a script that's called Paleo-Hebrew. Essentially, it's a Canaanite type script. It's an early alphabetic script. It's very similar to, say, the Canaanite scripts that you find with in the Levant. So looks very similar to, say, Moabite. It looks very similar to, say, Phoenician. So it's in that sort of family of scripts, those early alphabetic scripts that you find all through the Levant. So that's what he would have written on, and that's what we find in, say, writings in Ostraca that are contemporary with the Davidic kingdom. Now, what writing material would they have written on? Now, this is an interesting question, because it's going to depend on what they're writing. Okay. For small notes, they will use potsherds, basically pieces of broken pot. And everyone used these, from your king all the way down to your common peasant, because it was cheap, economical writing material. And everyone broke pots all the time. Pots are fragile. They're fragile. So people broke pots all the time. Oops, broke a pot. Got more notepads for you. Another posted, essentially. So short notes would have been written on ostraca. Larger compositions would have been written on parchment. Now, parchment being the stretched skins of sheep, essentially. Tanned, stretched skins of sheep. And that was expensive. You got about 4 pieces of parchment per sheep. So it was very expensive to write on parchment. So that's what they would have generally used for most of their writing material during, say, the United Monarchy. For monumental inscriptions, they would have probably have done it on stone. Now, there's 2 ways they could have written on stone. Which is one, we do find these plastered matzebot at, like, for example, at Shechem, where you basically have sort of a pillar that you cover in plaster and you write on that plaster with ink. For more permanent inscriptions, they would polish the surface of a stone and then inscribe the letters in that, just like we find at, say, for example, the Moabite stone, or, say, the Teldan stela. Okay? So those would be the writing options that would have been available to David and Solomon during their period of time. There's even some evidence, potentially, of, say, bronze plaques being incised with letters as well. So there was a range of writing materials that they could have used and probably did use. And they used, as I said, Paleo-Hebrew as their script of choice. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it, and I hope that helped. Okay, our next one here is from Amir Eshafra for $5. Thank you very much for super chat. And he goes, I heard someone claim that Genesis 1:27 teaches we're made masculine and feminine simultaneously. What are your thoughts on this? I think that's not a very good idea, but let's just bring that up. Let's bring up that text. Genesis 1:27. Okay, now, here's why this doesn't work, and we'll get into exactly why in just a second. We'll read the text. And God created man in his own image. In the likeness of God, he created him. Okay. Male and female, he created them. Okay? So, it starts off with that creation of the man. And God created man, or a man, in his own image. In the likeness of God, he created him, singular. And then the pronoun shifts. Male and female, he created them. Them is the plural pronoun. So, what he's saying here, and you could see here, there's an encapsulation in this one verse of Genesis chapter 2, where Genesis chapter 2 amplifies on this. So we have here in verse 27 that God's going to create the man in his own image. In the likeness of God, he created him, singular, singular masculine. Male and female, he created the two of them. Them, plural. So, it's not in no way teaching that that man was created as both masculine and feminine simultaneously. So anyway, that's the quick answer. It's a very, very simple exegetical problem. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. BC for $2 Australian. Thank you very much for that super chat. I heard matzahs means suffering. Is that true? Well, it is certainly suffering to eat it. Wow, is it suffering to eat matzah? I know there are some people out there that like matzah, but oof. Oof. I'm just going to take a look for something very quickly. Yikes. Now, I'm going to just take a quick look at halot here, because I am pretty sure it does not mean suffering. But you never know with some of these extended. As far as I know, matzah just means bread. But particularly the unleavened kind of bread. But I'm going to say fire up my NAS here, and we will just take a quick look just to make sure. Takes a couple seconds here for my NAS to spin up. Someday it'll come back. All right, here we go. Looking this up in halot. And Yeah, let's see here. Let's see. Okay. It's kind of funky. Truncate. Okay, getting closer here. Get past Lehen. Okay, matzah. Flatbread. No, we already know that already. There is an Arabic cognate that means to be tasteless. Neither sweet nor bitter, tart, tasteless. Let's see here. There is a matzah, secondary meaning of matzah, which means strife or to brawl. So, I haven't seen suffering yet, but I don't think the etymology of the strife and brawl is the same as the unleavened bread and the tastelessness of it. No, that seems to be the limit of that word's etymological range. So you basically have, basically the flatbread, that's the unleavened bread, strife, brawl, and to be tasteless. I so love halot. So anyway, I don't think there's much to the suffering on this. I think the whole idea of suffering from matzah is having modern people try to eat it. I mean, just really, it is suffering. Some people love it. I mean, some people really love it. I myself don't care for it. I used to think it wasn't so bad, and then I kind of grew up, and it's just like, no, not fond of it, not fond of it. But with that, I'll have to admit though, matzah with the horseradish or with the comets, the what's it called now? The apple, honey, wine, walnut mixture. Oh, that's good stuff. Yeah, that's good stuff. Yeah, well, old tennis shoes, yeah, would taste good with that stuff. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. And I have to make sure now I didn't lose some because I saw some just drop off here. Okay, we didn't lose any. All right, so our next super chat here is from Algut Robertson, from with 20 Swedish kroners super chat. Thank you very much for the super chat. It's good to see you here tonight. Hate mug idea. Absence of evidence is not evidence. Okay.
Where the heat text is not evidence of absence.
I get what you're saying. Actually, that would be actually a really great idea. I wonder if I can convince our merch dealer to do that.
Just have to get the different.
The right ink.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is actually a really great idea. I like that idea. Thank you for that idea. That would be fun.
Absence of evidence, and it appears.
Yep. That is actually a really great idea, and we could probably come up with some really cool art for that too. So yeah, that'd be interesting. I think I'll propose that to Spring and see what they say. So anyway, thank you very much for that super chat. Very, very much appreciated, and it's a wonderful idea. I like it. Like it a lot. Okay. Our next one here is from I'll get Robertson again for 20 Swedish kroner. Thank you very much for the super chat. When does martyrdom become indirect or direct suicide? Ooh. This was really an issue in the early Christian church. Okay? One of the things that was taught in the early Christian church was that if you weren't baptized, you weren't saved. And if you weren't saved, the only way you could be saved was if you were martyred. If you lost your life through persecution. This led to a problem in the early Christian church where Christians were more or less throwing themselves at the authorities to be martyred. And the Christian leaders had to put a stop to this because they died miserably, and frankly, the Romans at that point, this is actually this is like several generations after, say, the persecutions of, say, the first and mid second century. So what they did was basically said, okay, not baptized, not a problem. You've got the red baptism, baptism blood, but there's also going to be a white baptism, whereas you could become a monk. So in many ways, this martyrdom led to the development of the monastic movement because it provided an alternative to martyrdom instead. And basically, the church had to say, if you basically surrender to the authorities as a Christian hoping to be martyred, that's suicide and that's a sin. So they really had to put a stop to that.
He also asked, why does it?
Where's that? I'm gonna have to open that up a bit.
Right.
Okay. And he goes, when you can act to save your life, but you accept death, why does it become martyrdom and not suicide? Also, do you like a special saint if you want to share? I don't have any particular saint. Maybe Polycarp. I think Polycarp was really cool. Antipas. I think those are great saints. People who wouldn't compromise with the culture. Wouldn't compromise to save themselves. The thing is, what would you have to do to save your life? Is what it comes down to. There's always going to be this principle that we value life. We value life. Life is important. We all want to live. But sometimes the cost of living is too high. If the cost of living is denying God. Yeah, you could save your life by denying God. But, that might be too high a price. at that point, it does become martyrdom. You have, and to be honest, we have to define what martyrdom is. It comes from the Greek word martyros, which means to provide a witness. You're showing yourself to be a Christian. Okay? So you show yourself to be a Christian is an act of martyrdom when it comes at the risk of your life. That's not necessarily suicide. You can show a witness to being a Christian, or any other faith for that matter, without wanting to die. The Apostle John is considered a martyr even though he did not die at the hands of his captors. He was sentenced to death. They tried to carry out the sentence and they couldn't. So it's really not even the outcome of death that determines whether or not you're a martyr, but whether they intended to kill you. Were you willing to die for the faith? Were you willing to pay the ultimate sacrifice for the gospel of Jesus Christ? Where is your line in the sand? We all want to live. We all want to live comfortable, peaceful lives. Not all of us have that choice. Not all of us have that choice. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. It is a thought-provoking question, though. Where's the line between martyrdom and, suicide? And it comes really down to what's the principled approach here? What's the principle? If you're doing it for, to get yourself into heaven, that's not a good reason. If you're doing it for the gospel of Jesus Christ and you don't have an alternative that can save your life without preserving those ideals, that's martyrdom. It comes down to principles. Okay, our next one here is from Michael Gee. Thank you very much for this $20 New Zealand super chat. Very much appreciated. In number 89, I think you mean live stream number 89, you refer to Clinton Bailey and imply the Genesis genealogies can be read over a span of 50,000 years. Can you explain more? Oh, sure. All right, let's pull up Genesis 11. We can do this with Genesis 5 too. It's the same pretty much as far as the principle goes. But it all comes down to understanding these genealogies and how they are constructed. Okay, and they start with verse 10 here. This is Genesis 11, verse 10. These are the records of the generations of Shem. And generations, this is, the idea here is Toledot. It's not a genealogy, it's an outcome. What's the posterity of Shem? We have to understand when we look at these, it's not, genealogies aren't looking at back in time and going, oh, this is my ancestors. It's saying to you, well, this is what Shem's actions were, and this was the outcome of Shem's actions. Okay? So the point of this is to sort of get you to the end. Okay? But let's continue on here. Shem was 100 years old and became father of Arpachshad 2 years after the flood. And Shem lived 500 years, and he became the father of Arpachshad, and he had other sons and daughters. And Arpachshad lived 35 years and became father of Shelah, and Arpachshad lived 403 years, and he became father of Shelah, and had other sons and daughters. Okay. Now, one of the things we have to understand is that there's a structure to these genealogies, these particular lines. And we'll just take verse 12 here. And Arpachshad lived 35 years and became the father of Shelah. Okay? We just take that alone. Okay? Now, one of the things we know about these genealogies, and we know this from other genealogies, is that there's an honorific transposition between the most important member of the family and the firstborn son. We see this in child lists of say people who are say the sons of first wives, in say polygamous families in the ancient Near East. We do see this in all sorts of contexts and settings here. Okay, so what does that mean? That means when you list, say, the children, the most important member always comes first. Doesn't matter if he's the oldest child, doesn't matter if he's the youngest child. He always is listed first. And he's listed in the place of the firstborn. Okay? So, when we look at this, and we see Arpachshad lived 35 years, that's when Arpachshad started his new clan. Basically, he became father of a new clan. The most important, but the thing is that would be the firstborn son, the physical firstborn son, that Arpachshad would have lived 35 years. And he became the father of Shelah. Okay. Now, in the case of the translation here, it's probably it drops the he, but that's part of what's going on here, is that Shelah is filling in that placeholder for the firstborn son. The firstborn son would have been then demoted to second place, but so we don't know exactly when Shelah was born in these Hebrew genealogies, because they do play these games with these, and it's a really important cultural reason, because these are not trying to convey what we would call chronology. They are not trying to convey chronology with this. They're trying to honor ancestors and determine the outcomes of those ancestors' actions. So the whole idea of chronology and of trying to apply chronology to these genealogies is incredibly anachronistic. And it's just a concept they didn't have. They didn't need it. It wasn't necessary. So when you figure into the account that, say, Shelah could have been born any time between the 35 years that Arpachshad became a father and up to the 403 years that he lived after becoming a father, that is a very, very fuzzy, wide range. And this is why that these genealogies could potentially expand to not just, say, hundreds of years or thousands of years, but tens of thousands of years. They have that potential to do this. And the reason why is we find even modern clans that are 900 to 1,000 years old. So the lifespan and death of a clan is very, very stable. It's very stable over time. And we have to remember that the Israelite culture is a clan-based society and has been so for thousands of years. So, anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. And it's a complicated subject. It's very hard for Westerners to wrap their brains around because we don't do genealogies this way. And this is why sometimes I prefer actually calling them Toledot instead of genealogies, because there's interpretive baggage attached to the whole concept of genealogy. And there's different baggage associated with the whole idea of Toledot. They're different. They serve different functions. They're even constructed differently. So when we try to read this as chronology, we're kind of reading it at that point with Western eyes, importing our own presuppositions upon the text. And we can't do that. We have to import the presuppositions of the ancient Near East upon these texts. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and I hope that helped. Okay. Okay, we're getting close to midnight here, so we're probably just going to take the last couple super chats here and call it a night. Because we have been going for 4 hours. So we're not going to probably do any non-super chats, but we'll do non-super chats again next week. We always do some non-super chats every live cycle, or every live stream. But I think everyone here is tired tonight. It's been a long day. I've had a full day of work, so I apologize if I didn't get to your non-super chat today. Normally we do take 1 or 2 super chats at the end of a live stream, but I think everyone's exhausted tonight. Okay. Algut Robertson gives us a 20 Swedish kroner super chat. Thank you very much for the super chat. Really appreciate that. He says, pray for Christians in Sweden facing a lot of hatred. Well, we'll definitely pray for them. Right now, there's a lot of hatred against Christians going around. A lot of it. And a lot of it is not very fair and not very kind. So, I understand completely. Understand completely. And you'll definitely have our prayers. And I will even ask our community who's watching here today to please pray for the Christians in Sweden as well. So, thank you for bringing those concerns to our attention, and we will basically pray for the Christians in Sweden as well as the Christian church over there. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And then, I think this is our final super chat here, if I'm not mistaken, from Algut Robertson. Again, for 20 Swedish kroner. Thank you very much, super chat. What is your view on the devil's power against God, contra gods? Oh, that one's a no-brainer. The devil's a piker. The devil is a flea compared to God. A flea. The devil is a weak foe. Now, of course, the devil, whatever you want to call him, Lucifer, Satan, the serpent in the garden, one of the cherubim. He was a cherubim. He was actually a throne cherubim of all things. I mean, that's what people don't understand is, Satan was not just any old angel. No, he was one of the throne cherubim. One of the cherubim that was basically protecting the sacred space right around the throne of God. He saw God in all his glory. It was kind of crazy to think about that. There was nobody closer to God that was a created being than the devil himself. So there's some very interesting things, that dynamics going on there. But as far as his power is concerned, he's a second-rate adversary. So, I mean, look, these are, we're using comparative terms here, okay? Compared to us, he's phenomenally powerful. He's intelligent. He's old. He's ancient. He has seen civilizations rise and fall. He has communicated in their languages. He's much smarter than us. And he's playing a long game. But he is still nothing compared to the immeasurable majesty of God himself. God created the universe, has the power to create it all, to set things in motion, to lay down the foundations of the universe, and to save us from our sins. Greater is he who lives in us than he who lives in the world. Satan is a defeated enemy. He's just biding his time. He's trying to stretch this thing out as long as he can. That's what he's trying to do. Until the fullness of the Gentiles is complete, and then he's done. So I think that's a great note to end on. Because ultimately, we serve a great God. And a great Messiah. You know, our sins are forgiven. We are the victors through Jesus Christ. And the devil, you know, he may persecute us, he may torment us, he may send others against us, but he can't defeat us, because he can't defeat God himself. Yes, they might have their little victories here and there, but God has the big victory. The victory's over. It's done. It's a fait accompli. Fait accompli. And there's nothing the forces of darkness can do about that. Christ defeated death at the cross. Defeated sin and death at the cross. And that is the blessed hope. You know, it's not this world. It's the world to come, and the resurrection of the body, the ultimate conquering of death. So anyway, on that note, I want to thank you very much for that super chat. It was a great super chat. Again, we're hitting midnight now. Everyone here is absolutely exhausted, so we are actually going to call it a night at this point. I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. It was a great live stream with lots of wonderful questions. I want to thank all the super chatters who are helping us support this work of ours. We really, really appreciate the contributions and the support. What you do puts food on our table, and we so very much appreciate it. Also want to thank our Patreon supporters who really, really help us keep our equipment maintained. We need that, and we really, really appreciate that. We also want to thank our regular subscribers who watch our videos, who basically share links of our videos to other social media platforms. That helps get the message out. And if you're not a subscriber already, please consider hitting that subscribe button and the notification button so you don't miss out on any of our content. And with that said, I want to wish you a great night. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible. Good night, everyone.